You'd think that by the year 2007, the industry would have learned all the lessons that there were to be learned when it comes to developing video games. After all, they'd had decades to hone the craft, and bad titles should have been a thing of the past. Alas, it seems that nobody had gleaned anything from the scores of awful games that had come before, as studios continued to churn out steaming piles of ploppers for yet another year. So, once again, we're forced to name and shame the absolute worst of this bunch. As is always the case with our worst games of X year lists, we've plumbed the depths of both game rankings and Metacritic to find the most horrible of video game offenders from the year 2007. Say it with me now, viewers. Games must have received a minimum of 7 professional reviews in order to qualify, and where scores differed between aggregators, we've gone with the lowest. Honestly, that was awful, guys. It didn't sound like you were taking part at all. Shape up. I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst games of 2007. Number 10. Chicken Shoot. Wii, 26.38%. Before we even get into the actual gameplay of Chicken Shoot, we kind of have to question the premise, as why on earth would a farmer draft someone in to shoot chickens for him? Surely they're part of his livelihood. Ridiculous. Even if you could get past the dumb idea behind Chicken Shoot, the game didn't have an awful lot to offer. I suppose at the very least it did exactly what was promised, i.e. players got to gun down poultry with reckless abandon, but it's just that there wasn't an awful lot beyond that. The actual gameplay was incredibly simplistic, consisting of little more than pointing the Wiimote at the screen and blasting away. The developers were kind enough to throw in an egg-catching minigame, however it's hardly something that got players' hearts racing. The graphics were nothing to write home about either, and whilst the 2D hand-drawn style wasn't exactly horrible, it did make the game feel incredibly dated. On the whole, Chicken Shoot was technically competent, but the problem was that once the initial novelty wore off, and boy did it wear off quickly, the whole shtick just became repetitive and boring. I suppose you could call it a rather paltry offering. Number 9. The Mark PC, 26.25%. To say that the first-person shooter market is oversaturated is a bit like pointing out that water is wet, but just because there's an abundance of something doesn't mean that it's all going to be good. Case in point, The Mark, a budget title for PC created by Dreamcatcher and T7 Games. Although the premise of a US Marine and a British mercenary teaming up to stop a nuclear terrorist attack isn't a bad one, everything else about the game completely missed the mark, no pun intended. In terms of the plot, the whole thing makes little sense as the terrorists hold off their attack and go after the Marine as he's the only one who is able to identify the nuke. However, they seem to forget that the nuclear bomb goes boom, and so whether or not anyone can identify it is kind of moot. Switching your brain off to overlook the narrative wasn't an option either, as the Mark was so difficult that players found themselves having to replay levels 3 or 4 times in order to memorize where enemies were to avoid being surprised as they popped up out of nowhere. Don't get us wrong, we're all for a challenge, but there's a difference between encouraging players to hone their skills and just frustrating the heck out of them. Terrible game, 0 marks. Number 8. Jenga World Tour. Wii, 26%. There are certain board games that have made successful leaps into a digital format. Games like Monopoly work well because the PC and console equivalents take out much of the hard work associated with playing the game, as there's no longer any money to count or tiny metal dogs to get stuck in people's feet. Jenga, on the other hand, really isn't a game that needs any sort of electronic equivalent, and that's basically why Jenga World Tour was such a flop. Not only was the Wii version about 3 times the price of regular Jenga, but it was only a fraction of the fun. Attempting to remove the blocks was a pain, as it was hit and miss as to whether the Wii would remove the block you wanted, and considering that that's 100% of the point of Jenga, it rendered the video game completely redundant. The console edition did bring different modes and environments to the table, but since the core mechanic didn't work, it really didn't do anything to make players like it. There's a reason that Jenga hasn't changed much since the 70s, and it feels like the devs should have thought about why before churning out this hot garbage. Number 7. Wiffle Ball DS, 25.64%. Considering that most of us here at TripleJump grew up in Britain, we can't say we're familiar with wiffle ball. We're advised by our resident American, however, that it's a version of baseball played with lighter equipment. It sounds fun enough if you're 8 years old and don't want your teeth caved in by a heavy ball, but we're not sure it makes for a great foundation for a video game. Thankfully, Skyworks Technologies were kind enough to prove us right, as wiffle ball is a complete sham. Unlike its real-world counterpart, wiffle ball DS doesn't make use of bases and there's no running involved, so the entire game consists of the player character either batting or pitching. Sadly, neither of these mechanics work very well. When batting, the player could only move closer to or further away from the plate, which would be fine if the AI pitcher couldn't throw the ball outside of these parameters, and pitching fared no better, as the batting AI suddenly became Ken Griffey Jr. That's a sports reference, I think. Beyond the title of the game, which sounds like something Blackadder made up, there's nothing fun about wiffle ball, and players would have undoubtedly had more enjoyment taking the cartridge down to their local park and hitting it with a baseball bat. Number 6. Game Party. Wii, 25%. Here at Team TripleJump, we really like games, and we also like parties, especially if there's a buffet. So we all got quite excited when we were reminded of Game Party for the Nintendo Wii. 2 things we really enjoy in one easy-to-digest package. Excellent. Then we remembered what list this was, and our excitement quickly deflated like a poorly cooked souffle. The problem with Game Party is that there were already loads of other games on the market that had mini-games covered. You wanted sports? Wii Sports! Something board game-like? Mario Party 8. A game that's absolutely bat-ploppers insane? WarioWare Smooth Moves. Game Party brought absolutely nothing new to the table, and everything it tried was worse than its competitors. Though the controls worked fine, aside from a couple of bugs and glitches here and there, the minigames themselves were completely soulless, and the vast majority of players would have found themselves giving each one a go before never touching them again. Bafflingly, as bad as Game Party was, it somehow managed to spawn not 1, but 4 sequels, each one just as dire as the last. Come on, own up, which one of you keeps buying Game Party? Number 5. Cool for Heroes Pompolic Wars. PC, 25%. My god, not since Black Desert Online have we seen a character creator as in-depth as this one. Quick, someone call the writer, we need to do a rewrite of our 10 best character creators in video games list. I jest, of course, though as naff as the whopping 2 classes and 3 special abilities that are on offer in Cool for Heroes Pompolic Wars are, the creation suite was probably the highlight of the game. The box alleges that demons, led by a guy called Pompolic, are trying to enslave the human race, and it's up to the player to collect Dark Souls, no not that one, in order to defeat him. I say the box alleges this because nowhere in the actual game is any of this indicated. The Dark Souls just bobbed about each level, waiting for the player to pick them up, and once enough have been collected, the next stage could begin. It wasn't enough just to collect the Dark Souls, however, as each one the player obtained spawned some of the stupidest enemies in gaming history. In addition to the non-existent story and the horrible gameplay mechanics, Cool for Heroes Pompolic Wars was riddled with bugs and glitches. Cool for Heroes, more like cool for a coroner, this one's dead on arrival. Got 'em. Number 4. Cruis'n. Wii, 25%. We'd like to say this is the first time the cruis'n series has offended. However, according to aggregator site Game Rankings, its older brother, cruis'n USA, was one of the worst games of 1996. And despite having over a decade to correct all of cruis'n USA's mistakes, the developer behind cruis'n for the Wii decided not to bother and instead just doubled down on the abhorrence. The thing about cruis'n is that it wasn't completely unentertaining, and players had a certain amount of fun screaming around the tracks at high speed and pulling off ridiculous jumps with their cars. The Wiimote controls, while not perfect, did the job just fine, and there were 12 tracks and a multiplayer mode, so just where did it all go wrong? Well, first of all, the graphics weren't great, even taking into account the capabilities of the console. Then there were the hordes of technical problems that plagued the game from the moment players fired it up. If things got too exciting on the track, cruis'n would freeze up, and even when things were running as they should, players found that the frame rate was still laughable. It feels like cruis'n could have been something quite special if the developers had taken the time to just polish it up a little, but like its predecessors, it ended up as little more than bargain bin fodder. Number 3. Deal or No Deal. DS, 20%. When you think about it, Deal or No Deal is kind of a silly concept to begin with. A contestant chooses random boxes, each of which has an assigned monetary value, and once that box is picked, it's out of the game. Ultimately, they pick a box blindly and end up with whatever money is inside, yet somehow this fills an hour of TV. Unsurprisingly, the premise didn't work well as a video game, and whilst the Wii version managed a rather middling 56 out of 100 on Metacritic, the DS offering didn't fare so well. Deal or No Deal's major flaw was the fact that the randomization element of the game, i.e. the thing that would make it replayable, was completely broken. Although the amounts of money in each box would change if consecutive games were played without shutting the console down, they'd go right back to their original positions as soon as players powered off, meaning that the $1 million was always in the same place. It also lacked the fun of other TV show adaptations, because although the likes of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire don't offer cash prizes, at least it's entertaining to answer the questions. Still, at least it didn't have Noel Edmonds. Number 2. Yaris. Xbox 360, 17%. Over the years, there have been a lot of adver games, and it's safe to say that none of them have been great. Though titles like Chex Quest and Yo Noid have their cult followings, the vast majority of other promotional games are awful, and that includes Yaris, a game released exclusively for the Xbox Live Arcade that aimed to promote the Toyota model of the same name. According to our friends over at Metacritic, Yaris is not only the second worst game of 2007, but is the worst game ever to be released for the Xbox 360. Rather than simply creating a racing game that showed off the capabilities of the car, the developers opted for a futuristic racer where the Yaris had a gun attached to the bonnet and had to take down enemies. Since both acceleration and steering were mapped to the same analog stick, the game controlled awfully and the graphics looked like something that had been plucked out of a 10-year-old title. Admittedly, Yaris was free on the Xbox Live Arcade, however this was pretty much the only praise that anyone had for it, with one reviewer even going so far as to list its only pros as it's quick to download and quick to delete. Ouch. Number 1. Little Britain, the video game, PS2, 16%. At the time it was released, Little Britain was a fairly popular bit of television, and for a few years in the early 2000s it felt like you couldn't move more than 5 yards without running into someone willing to do a terrible Vicky Pollard impersonation. More recently, however, the show has come under a lot of criticism for its depiction of marginalised groups, and the humour holds up about as well as a wet napkin in a blender. If the gags in the TV show were questionable, then those in the video game were just an outright hell no, and try as the game did to capture the essence of its small screen counterpart, it failed at every turn. Little Britain the video game is made up of a whole host of mini-games, each starring the characters from the show. There's a Lou and Andy diving game, a Pac-Man clone featuring fat fighters Marjorie Dawes, and 5 other unremarkable offerings, each more insensitive than the last. Naturally, as with most bad games, the graphics are horrible and the controls aren't great, but what really lets Little Britain the video game down is its humour, or rather, its lack thereof.
I can't believe this game was ever made.
So congratulations Little Britain the video game, you're officially the worst game of 2007. Take your prize money and get off my property.